I think people can look at young adults and young leaders like myself and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Like, this is the next generation of leaders. We are in the current generation of leaders. Just because, I'm 22 and I founded my nonprofit when I was 18, I know that that's not what you see every day, but I think, we're all coming to the table with passions, with lived experience, with a drive to make a difference. I saw that my life was a vast, glowing, empty page, and I could do anything I wanted.
Hey y'all, it's Tom. Listen, welcome to another episode of the Impactivist Show. I'm here with my new friend. I want to introduce you to an extraordinary young woman named Taylor Kane. Taylor is known as the girl who changed the dictionary. She's graduated from George Washington State University and has been inspiring people, I think, since she was about 3 years old. And we're going to get into that. But just to give you a little backstory, Taylor's the carrier of a rare disease called adrenoleukodystrophy, or ALD. It's a deadly genetic condition that impacts about 1 in 18,000 people. Now, it's more deadly, more serious for men, for boys. It's a brain disorder that tends to destroy the myelin in the brain, which is that protective sheath that surrounds your neurons, all the things that help you think and control your muscles. Sadly, Taylor's father, Jack, was diagnosed when she was 3, and unfortunately, he passed before she turned 6 years old. So she began fighting her home state of New Jersey in about 2012 to create a new law requiring newborn testing for ALD. We're going to get into her whole story. It's really inspiring. She's released her first book. She has founded the organization Remember the Girls. And so when I tell you that she's a hero, you're going to understand what I mean in just the next few minutes. And I really am excited about that. So right now, please help me welcome Taylor Kane. Taylor, thanks for being here. And
Yeah,
thanks.
thanks so much, Tom. I'm really excited for our conversation and to be able to talk to your audience and tell them more about myself, more about ALD, and hopefully just inspire people to keep chasing their dreams and understanding that no dream is too big.
I love that. Listen, for those who don't know, Taylor's in our Impactivist group on Facebook. We have a mutual friend named Monica Weldon who we did an interview with. She's a longtime friend of mine, and she connected Taylor and I, which is one of the things I love about social media, right, is being able to connect and resource each other and inspire each other. Can you kind of walk us through your journey? Give us a little bit about ALD and about your experience and growing up. Just kind of let us know what you've been through.
Definitely, yeah. And as you say, like this biology background, I mean, I think having someone in your family or personally being affected by a rare disease, it kind of does turn you into like a student in a lot of ways. Like outside of my journey, I'm not really that interested in science or medicine. Like I've always been English history kind of person, but you do kind of become a student in your own way. So yeah, my back in 2001, my dad Jack just started having really weird behavioral changes. He was very neat and organized, and my mom noticed that he started becoming a bit messier. He always woke up the same time every day. She noticed he started sleeping in. His attitude started changing. So subtle things, but enough, for my mom to realize. So they decided to go to marriage counseling to see, to work things out. And the marriage counselor suggested that my dad get an MRI of his brain, which seems super random. You would never think that a marriage counselor would think that, these small behavioral changes could really be an organic problem. And my mom and dad were like, that's kind of ridiculous, but they went through with it anyway. And a few days later, they found out that my dad had a rare brain disease called adrenoleukodystrophy, or ALD for short. So ALD is a genetic disease. My dad was the first person in his family, in his immediate family, to be diagnosed. But then after that fact, we were able to, trace it back a bit through our family and see that his mother or my grandmother was a carrier of the disease. She passed it down to all four of her kids. So my dad's identical twin brother, my other uncle, and my aunt, who was also a carrier. So when my dad was diagnosed, it was definitely really bleak, especially for my mom. You know, in the early 2000s, there was no Facebook, there was no social media to turn to find other people in your situation. So, you know, she basically would go on the internet, look up ALD, and see that there was no treatment, there was no cure, and that, you know, it pretty much was a death sentence, especially back in the early 2000s. So I don't remember much from that time. Most of my memories about my dad are when he was sick. So over the next 2 years, he quickly deteriorated. ALD, as you mentioned, destroys the myelin, or the white matter in the brain. So for men who have the full brain cerebral disease, yeah, it just basically starts breaking down your brain, and you lose like basic functions. And every man or boy that has the disease, it can be somewhat different. Like some people with ALD, they go blind, they go deaf. My dad didn't have those two in particular, but it also slows down your muscles. So my dad lost the ability to swallow and had to get a feeding tube. He developed early onset dementia. So, you know, he started becoming really disoriented and not really knowing what was going on around him. He eventually completely lost the ability to walk, to talk, and he went into a vegetative state and lived in a hospital bed in our dining room in our house on hospice until he passed away in 2003. So most of the memories of my dad are from that time when he was sick. I'm honestly so grateful that him and my mom decided that he would stay in our house during that time. I know my mom got a lot of criticism from people who would say like, oh, how can you expose your kids to seeing, you know, their dad like that? That's so horrible. Like they're going to have problems, you know, from seeing their dad. But I'm honestly so grateful that I was able to spend those years with my dad. Even if he was sick, he was still my dad. He was still the same person. So I'm really grateful that, you know, he was in our house and he had great caretakers. But yeah, and as I mentioned, ALD, it's a genetic disease and it's carried on the X chromosome. So that's known as an X-linked disease. So X-linked diseases, yeah, they're passed on the X chromosome. And so my dad, since males will pass their X chromosome to any daughters they have, that made me an obligate or definite carrier of the disease. So when my dad was diagnosed in 2001, the doctors also told my family that this meant that I was a carrier and that I would have a 50% chance of passing the disease on when I had kids one day. So the thing about X-linked diseases is that unlike some other diseases where both partners, you know, need to be a carrier, with ALD and other X-linked diseases, regardless of my future partner, if I had children naturally, there would be a 50% chance that they would inherit the condition. And there's still not a lot of research on the symptoms that can affect carriers, but, you know, it's something that I know will likely happen to me in the future, but I feel ready and prepared to tackle whatever comes my way. And I'm really faithful that when I am older and if I do experience these worst symptoms, that there'll be more treatment options for me, that there'll be a better outcome and options for me when I'm older that unfortunately a lot of the carriers that are experiencing symptoms now don't have.
Yeah. Well, and you said a couple of things in there, Taylor, that I really love. I really want to unpack for a second. One is you used the word grateful and gratitude a couple of times. And you said that you're really grateful that your mom decided to have your dad at home, have him cared for at home, and you could spend time with him. I think that's just a really beautiful thing to be able to look back and realize how precious those times were. The other thing is going through high school and coming through, you know, my daughter is starting middle school this year. So, you know, starting kind of that time in your life where your boys are important and you begin to think about dating and all those kinds of things. all that has to play into the decisions you make, that other girls they don't have those concerns, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So as I mentioned, I've known that I was a carrier of ALD for as long as I can remember. So even before I fully understood, I still knew. Like, I think my mom told me when I was about 7 or 8, and every few years she would re explain what it meant for me. And so I could really fully understand the implications that it would have on my future, and especially regarding family planning. Um, Carriers have a 50% chance of passing the disease down to any kids. So this would mean that for 50% chance that if I had a boy, he would have the disease, and a 50% chance that if I had a girl, she would be a carrier. So I've always known ever since middle school, high school, that if I did have kids one day, that I would take the route of doing super long term, but in vitro fertilization with pre-implantation genetic testing. So basically it's a technology that's available that could ensure someone who is a carrier like myself, that they could have children that are free of the disease. But as far as dating goes, I think I've always been really public, not always, but in high school and especially in college, really public about my advocacy and my journey, like on social media. Like, or even if you were to look up my name, you could so easily find out that I'm a carrier. It's never something that I've kept hidden. I've just always been really open about it. And so I think that the conversation for me with dating has been a little bit different than maybe some other carriers, just because, it gets talked about right away, regardless of the situation. Just because if someone asks about Remember the Girls, it's brought up in conversation very early. But, I think it can be difficult for carriers because I think, it's something obviously that you wouldn't be able to tell by looking at us, especially young women who are more pre-symptomatic. So it's really up to a carrier herself when she wants to disclose the information. And, it's hard because it's like, so you want to tell someone early, but if you say on the first date, like, oh yeah, I'm a carrier, so this what it mean for our theoretical kids one day, the person might be like, oh, she's already thinking about our theoretical kids one day. It's just kind of a complicated, sticky situation. But I'm really lucky and grateful that, I've never felt judged or made to feel weird. I think now there's so many unconventional ways to have a family, and I feel like I don't see anything negative about, me doing an alternative route one day. I'm so grateful. I do keep saying the word grateful, but I'm really grateful that that option exists. But yeah, I think for a lot of carriers, the dating and disclosure can be really difficult. But I think just the more that we talk about it, and the more that, people go to the public and, do things like this and talk about rare diseases or being a genetic carrier, it'll become way less of a taboo and just something that's easier for everyone to talk about and is not seen as, surrounded by these misconceptions and stereotypes.
Yeah, and I'll tell you this, Taylor. One of the things that I think is so inspiring, because you are so public, you are easy to find out about. It's easy for me to research and to get parts of your story, for me to grab your book. One of the things that really has impressed me is that there was no support when you realized this was your life, this was your journey. There wasn't a support group for what you needed, so you created your own, right?
Yeah.
Whether it was Facebook, from the Facebook group, YAC, what was that? Young
ALD carriers.
Young ALD carriers. From that Facebook group to your book, Rare Like Us, about your dad, and then the Remember the Girls project. So talk to us about Remember the Girls. But first, talk to me about the book. Having written a book myself, it's always been interesting to me about how in that process, how it changes yourself. right? It becomes a tool to help other people, but it also is very fulfilling on a personal level, right?
Definitely, definitely. And so my book has been out for over a year now. I've been doing public speaking and telling my dad's story and writing articles and doing interviews since I was, in elementary school and middle school. So I feel like always in the back of my mind, I knew that I wanted to put my dad and my family's entire journey into a book for a few different reasons, to honor his legacy. I think he would be really excited to know that there's a book about him, even though it's an unfortunate story and about, me losing him. I think that he would kind of find it like funny in a way, like, wow, there's a whole book about me and people are reading about me. He was like a very just outgoing and silly guy, but to honor my dad's legacy was one of the biggest reasons I wanted to write it, to raise awareness of ALD, but all rare diseases in general. I thought, even though I was young, I started writing it when I was like 16 or 17. I thought, it's not too early to write a book. I thought I had a lot to say. Yeah, I guess through the journey of writing it itself, that's when what you mentioned became more apparent to me. Like, it became so much more of a personal and transformative thing, especially because, writing the first half of my book is about the 2 years from when my dad got diagnosed to when he passed away. And of course, I was really young at the time. So I had to do a lot of digging and a lot of going through my mom's, intense notes and paperwork she kept from the time, just asking my mom like a ton of questions so I could really just piece everything together. Like, I knew the basic timeline, but I think to write a book about, those years, I needed a lot more details, and I needed to really capture the feeling and the atmosphere of, what was going on in our house when my dad was there on hospice. After speaking about the same thing so many times, it's almost in a way you can become a little bit desensitized to it. And, I told my dad's story over and over, and it almost became like just a spinning wheel in my head that I could say without really thinking about it. But writing the book, just reminded me and reinstilled in me this passion to just keep moving forward with, ALD advocacy, with rare disease advocacy, with, doing things good in honor of my dad's memory. And yeah, it was an amazing experience. And it's really, just exciting and crazy to me that I have a book and that it's been out, for a year now. And so it's a good start.
Oh, for sure. Well, and I'll tell you this, just on a personal note, one of the things I love about your book is that for me, the way I see it is you don't have to have a rare disease to be impacted by what you've written. Your story, it's this testament that you can accomplish, you can impact, you can make a positive difference in the world at any age, with any background, with any obstacle.
Yeah, I didn't want this to be a book that's just, outlining all things about ALD. I think, as you said, especially the second half of the book, I go more into that message of how I turned around this adversity in my life and, took hold of my future and decided that I wanted to move forward with doing something good. So yeah, I think the message is really applicable. I also really try to make the book have a lot of humor in it. Even though it's about, like a sensitive topic, I tried to include I did include some stories just to make people laugh and smile. I didn't want it to be this sad story, because the truth is, even though, my dad was terminally ill, it's not like every day we sat there and were sad. We had a lot of really good days. I have really happy memories from that time in my life. Like, I don't look back on that time when my dad was sick and I don't look back and get sad. Like, I look back and, think of, funny things, happy things. Like, for example, and this is one snippet that I wrote about in the book, but at the beginning of my dad's decline, he could still drive, and he was out of work at this point, but, we really didn't want him to go out by himself, just because, he could still talk and communicate and walk, but, he just mentally was not really there. So one night he took the car and disappeared for a few hours. And so my mom rightfully was freaking out, trying to figure out where he was. This was also, people didn't have cell phones then, so it's not like she could have just called him on the phone. Totally different world. But eventually he showed back up at the house, and he had bought in like 100 fly swatters from a dollar store. Like he bought so many fly swatters and he like had no explanation for it. And, you know, obviously that, you know, a big part of that, you know, he was having problems from his disease. But like when we look back at that, like that's such a ridiculous memory. Like he bought all these fly swatters, like for no reason at all. And yeah, it's just something like to just smile about rather than just be sad, you know, that, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
I just look back on it and try to think of the good things, and I really try to make that apparent in the book.
Yeah, no, 100%. So I don't know if the name Jocko Willink rings a bell. Jocko has this he's got a podcast, he's got a book, he does TED Talks, really interesting, really inspiring guy. His whole thing is extreme responsibility, which is kind of what I have seen you do, is take responsibility, take action, take control over the things in your life that you can control, through the book, through support groups, through Remember the Girls, all that kind of thing. We have a girl in our area who is 12 years old, I think, and her name's Gracie, a friend of ours, and she has started a nonprofit called Gracie's Canned Goods. And Gracie, if you're watching this, we're giving you a shout out. But what she's done is she does all these food drives and she raises money to feed kids and families who need it. And when I look at people like Gracie and I look at people like you and your journey, I would love for you to share a little bit about what it's like to be a young advocate, a young entrepreneur, having people take you seriously and kind of navigating that space. What's that been like?
Totally. And Gracie sounds amazing. Definitely keep it up. I love hearing stories like that. And it really reminds me of myself back when I was that age. Yeah, I think when I started first working to raise awareness of ALD back in 4th grade, I never would have thought that I was doing advocacy. I honestly didn't even know what the word advocacy, maybe till like 5 years ago. But growing up, you know, I was just really wanted to be involved in things, not just for my dad's disease, but I was always that kind of person, you know, similar to Gracie, where I just wanted to do something for the community. I was so eager to be a volunteer. I was really involved in like extracurriculars in school. I wanted to be in student council. I feel like, you know, I just always been a doer. And I feel like my mom says my dad was, you know, the same kind of way, where if he would see a problem or see something that he wanted to change, he just couldn't sit back and assume that other people were going to do it. You know, I think I've just always had that doer mentality just growing up my entire life. And, you know, when I was young and trying to get more involved in volunteerism, it was hard. I remember when I was like 13, I called a bunch of local hospices to see if I could volunteer. And they all told me that the minimum age for volunteers was 16. And I was so frustrated because all I wanted to do was volunteer for hospice and give back to, you know, them for giving so much to my family and my dad when he was sick. And finally, I had one that was willing to take me on as like a junior volunteer, you know, something that they had never done before. But I think they could just sense that I was so passionate and committed. And it's not like I was, you know, doing something for my resume. It's not like I just had to get volunteer hours. Like I just wanted to. And, you know, I'm so glad that they took me on and I started getting experience volunteerism that way. And then once, you know, I went through middle school and high school, just continuing my advocacy. As you mentioned, I advocated for ALD newborn screening in New Jersey when I was like in 7th and 8th grade. And so I think kind of without even thinking, it just clicked in my mind, like, I want my state to be screening newborns for ALD. So, you know, I wrote letters. I, you know, was invited to testify once they introduced a bill. And I really think that just showed me the power of storytelling, not even in general, but especially as a young person. I have always felt that my story and my message in a lot of ways is more moving because of my age and because I have this drive and passion as such a young person. I think people can look at young adults and young leaders like myself and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Like, this is the next generation of leaders. And I know those thoughts are well-intentioned, but to me, when I hear I'm the next generation of leaders, I think people can look at young adults and young leaders like myself and they're like, oh, that's amazing. Like, this is the next generation of leaders. We are in the current generation of leaders. Just because, I'm 22 and I founded my nonprofit when I was 18, I know that that's not what you see every day, but I think, we're all coming to the table with passions, with lived experience, with a drive to make a difference. And I think that not only should age not matter, I think age should matter. And I think that young people, we need to use our skills, being, Generation Z, being millennials, to our advantage. And I think we have, these skills and, growing up with technology and social media that other generations just don't have.
I could not agree with you more, man. We have this thing. I've said for years that especially high schoolers, middle schoolers, they're not the leaders of the future. They're the leaders right now, right? We have this thing, Simon Sinek's quote that I've stolen and adopted and made my own, is that leadership's not about being in charge. It's about caring for those in your charge, right? And that is 100% what I have seen you do in this journey, and which I think is amazing, which I applaud you for more than you know. But so much in the fact that I want people to be sure to understand why at the top of the show I wanted to refer to you as the girl who changed the dictionary, because that is, I think that was really formative, right? Can you walk us through this? You tell the story better than I do. Walk me through that experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So in high school, I was always really interested in women's rights. And so one day my friend sent me a picture of the definition of hero on, just dictionary.com. And the definition of hero said a man with distinguished courage or ability. And she sent it to me because she knew that I would probably be like annoyed, because who would think that, hero, I always thought of that as a gender neutral word. Obviously the word heroine exists, but, I think that is kind of like a supplementary word. Like, I don't think people, look at those in the same. And to me, hero was always gender neutral. And, if you see people using the word hero, you don't say hear people saying like heroes and heroines, people say hero. And so when I saw that the definition of hero on dictionary.com was a man of distinguished courage, I just could imagine like a young girl looking up that word and seeing like, oh, a hero's a man, and just getting that associated in her head. And that really just made me mad. So that day I started emailing dictionary.com and, saying that I thought that the definition was outdated, that it was exclusionary, that hero isn't used in a gendered way. It shouldn't be. I went back and forth with them, and I started a Facebook group to redefine hero. I started a petition on change.org. I really just saw it and was like, I'm going to get this definition changed, because it just frustrated me, and I thought that it should just be changed. And they did in a few months end up changing the definition from a man of distinguished courage or ability to a person of distinguished courage or ability. But I agree that was really formative for me. And I think that experience just speaks to a lot of who I am as a person. Like, I saw something that I thought wasn't right. And, within hours, I started working to change it.
And that's also a testament to the power of technology, to the power of social media, right? It's put tools in everyone's hand. It's leveled the playing field. My grandparents, I could moan about my grandparents sitting around and reading the newspaper all day, or watching TV or listening to the radio all day. And so it's not about the tool, it's about what you do with the tool. And that's enabled all of us to have a platform, all of us to have a voice, all of us to have a reach and an impact. The choice is, what do we do with that tool, right? Do we use it to just be a critic, or do we use it to be an agent of change?
Yes.
Right? You can be a critic. Most people are critics, but people like you are contributors, and they inflict change. They have an impact. So I think that's beautiful. I have one more question, but before I ask my last question, I want to ask you, where do you want people? Where can people find you? Where can people follow you and keep up with what's going on?
Yeah, so I would say, just to keep it easy, I would probably say just to go to my website, taylorkane.com. I have everything on my social media linked there. if you're interested in looking more into Remember the Girls and learning more about the nonprofit I run now, you can go to rememberthegirls.org and find all our social media on the website.
Great. And we'll put those links up. We'll put graphics up. Make sure we get that out there for the world. Last question, which I'm really excited to see what you say, is if you could have one billboard, right? If you could put up a billboard, a tweet, an Instagram post, a Facebook, or whatever, that the whole world would see to give out one message to people, whether it's adults, whether it's kids like Gracie, what would you want to say to the world?
I can imagine like an all white billboard just with a quote. And when I first read this quote a couple of years ago, it just always stuck with me because, well, you'll understand why. So my favorite quote is, it's a Jack Kerouac quote, and it says, "I saw that my life was a vast, glowing, empty page, and I could do anything I wanted." And I just love that quote, and I think it is so beautiful. Like, my life's an empty page. You know, we obviously there's some things that are out of our control, but you know, it goes back to, you know, the extreme responsibility, and you know, you are the narrator of your life. Like, if you make certain choices, if you do certain things, you can create this beautiful life. And you know, obviously we all have struggles, and you know, we all have hard days, but I think just that quote on a billboard, I think that would inspire a lot of people. And even, you know, it's not something about me or about myself.
As an English nerd, I'm a Kerouac fan anyway, but just that idea, just that motivation of, I have a blank page and I'm the author of my own story, really means a lot. I think that means a lot to people. Mm-hmm. So I love it. Taylor, thank you so much for being here. Thanks for taking time. It's great to get to visit with you about your story, for the work that you do, for the inspiration that I think this has been and will be for lots of people. I'm really grateful that we could connect and visit.
Me too. Yeah, this was a great conversation, and I'm excited, you know, to keep moving forward with my journey and being involved in the Impactivist group, and, you know, uplifting others who are all fighting in the end for, you know, the same goal, which is to make the world a better place. So thanks so much for having me.
And hey, Impactivists, before you leave, I've got one question for you. See, Taylor and I talked about a lot of things today, and what we would like to know is what's one takeaway you have from this episode? Like, what's one thing you can put into action? One thing that inspired you or motivated you, or one thing that maybe you think someone else may need to hear right now? You know, maybe the Jack Kerouac quote of being the author of your own page really resonated with you. So please, please, please drop a comment below. Be sure and hit the subscribe button on YouTube. Turn on the notifications for our Facebook group, our Impactivist group there. Right now, that's where the magic is happening. So get involved, join our Facebook community, and let's work together to make our world something that's good for all of us. Together, let's make an impact. I'll see you soon.